What's up, everybody? Welcome back to C4C Apologetics. So today I want to take just a quick video. If you want to get into deeper on this topic, check out my podcast over at Castbox, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Play Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, Pocket Cast, and Podcast Player. Check out the episode over there because we go in more detail as far as this topic. 7 reasons why New Testament tithing is unbiblical. That we're not commanded to tithe like the Old Testament. What are these 7 ways? I just want to lay them out. I'll give you passage references. You can look them up if you'd like to, but I'd recommend you checking out the podcast as well. First, the Old Testament tithing was based upon the Mosaic covenant, was part of the 613 laws that God has given Moses when he came down from Mount Sinai. The Old Testament tithe, we can read that in Deuteronomy chapter 12 and elsewhere in the Old Testament. It was tied to the covenant that God had made with Israel and with God. Second, the Old Testament tithe was never a financial means. There was never money given as a tithe. There was never gold, silver, gems, jewels, whatever, treasure given as a tithe. The tithe was only ever given of corn, grain, wine, oil, livestock, cattle, the firstlings. It was only the produce of the harvest as well as the cattle, never of financial things. Third, we see this in Numbers chapter 18, that the tithe was part of the blessing God has given the tribe of Levi. Realize when God has distributed the land for the tribes of Israel, the tribe of Levi did not receive a parcel of land. Yet we're told that for the tribe of Levi, God was their inheritance. And that here in the book of Numbers, we see that the tithe was a blessing God has given to the Levites. And so the tithe, when it was given, taken to the temple, to the tabernacle, and then given to the Levites as an inheritance and as a blessing from God to them. Fourth, seeing as though there's no longer a Levitical priestly tribe, there's no longer a temple, and there's no longer a tabernacle or a storehouse or a storeroom to put the tithes, there's no one to give it to, and there's nowhere to store it. We read about this in the book of Nehemiah chapters 12 and 13 and elsewhere in Scripture. We do not have a place to give it, to put it, or a people to give it. Number 5, Hebrews chapter 7. The only references in the New Testament about the Old Testament tithing is in reference to Abraham and his giving of a tithe to Melchizedek. Now, this was prior to the Mosaic Law, and we see that Abraham gave this tithe willingly, volitionally, and based upon the fact that he thought this priest king of Salem, Melchizedek, was worthy to receive it. God did not command Abraham. Abraham just gave it free willingly. 6, all references to tithing in the New Testament, whether it's Hebrews 7 looking at Abraham and Melchizedek, or in the Gospels, all references, check it out, in the New Testament are descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, the references in the New Testament of the Old Testament tithing is the fact that it is describing historically what happened, not prescribing what is supposed to happen. There's a big, big difference. Number 7. Nowhere in the New Testament are Christians or the church commanded to give a tithe. You won't find that in the New Testament. What Christians and what the church are supposed to be doing is giving an offering. Those that give do it with simplicity. We know that Jesus said it is more blessed to give than to receive. The New Testament does not command a Christian to give 10% of their income to the church or whatever the case is. The New Testament admonishes and urges Christians to free willingly give a grace offering. So in summary, the New Testament does not command or declare or obligate Christians, the church, or even Jews to give a tithe. When Jesus Christ died on the cross, he fulfilled the law, he abolished the law, and it was rendered inoperative. This is what the book of Hebrews is about. Plus, what we see in the New Testament, in those passages in the Gospels where Jesus references the Pharisees' giving of a tithe, the tithe turned into a check block item. It was just something that they were obligated to do, and they just did it as soon as they got paid. Yep, here's the 10%, the tithe of the mint, whatever the case is, and they give it to God. It was never motivated, or it turned out to be just obligatory. In the end, we see in the Gospels, it was never motivated by a heart of love. It was only a check block item. And I imagine a lot of times today when people are giving the tithe in the church, it's more or less a part of a bill that we have on the budget. We have on our budget sheet, okay, we just got paid 10%, whatever it is, here's to the church. What grace giving does, and what grace giving that the New Testament teaches allows, is to have Christians to have open eyes, to have open ears, to be sensitive to the Spirit's impulse, to lead us, to guide us, to direct us on who, when, and where to give money to. Now, I'm all for supporting the local church. We are supposed to financially support the local church and the people that are in leadership there. The New Testament clearly identifies this. But we're also not to shut up the bowels of compassion. We're supposed to, if, like James says, we see a brother in need, we are not just to say, oh, please be warm and filled and just pray for him, but we're supposed to help them and take care of them as much as God has given us so that we can help others. Remember that Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So what do we treasure? Do we treasure the fact of our time? Do we treasure the fact of our money? Tithe limits giving to 10%, while grace giving opens the door to 20, to 30, to 90 or 100%. Look at the widow with the 2 mites. She gave the smallest amount of money to God. And yet Jesus says she gave more because she gave out of her poverty. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What do you treasure? Are we turning the tithe into just a check block item? Or are we focused on grace giving, giving as we're led by the Spirit, not giving grudgingly, but cheerfully? So 7 reasons why New Testament tithing is unbiblical. If you want to continue to tithe and do 10%, by all means, that's the Christian liberty and freedom that you and I both share as Christians. But understand, grace giving opens the door to such more benevolence. Till next time, thanks for checking out. God bless.